If there's one thing that holds back more entrepreneurs from successfully building and launching their no-code apps over anything else, it's the fact that they don't have a strategic roadmap to follow throughout the development and the launch of their apps. They don't know what to build strategically, when to build it, and in what order. It's not the little technical nuances or the troubleshooting of the specific features. It's not the design. It's not anything like that. It's the fact that they don't have a roadmap to follow throughout their development and launch. And when they don't have that, what they end up doing is just sort of winging it throughout their development. A lot of people step into the no-code space. They don't have a technical background and they think, you know what, this is no code. I don't need to know how to program, so I can just kind of jump in and get started. But there's so much strategy that needs to come into play. And so just because you're stepping into this space that's really it doesn't involve any coding, you still need to know how to strategically build and launch your app. You still need to know what the main steps are that you need to go through so that you're not left on the other end doing a bunch of backtracking or just having a failed launch and then wasting all that time and effort that you put into the app in the first place. So today, we're going to talk about what your roadmap needs to look like to get you towards that launch in a strategic way and in a scalable way so that you can actually grow that app into a business that's reliable. Make sure you stick around until the end because I'm also going to talk about a free 75-minute training that we put together for you, and it's going to help you start building your app today. And if you've already started building your app, it's going to help you make sure that you're doing so correctly and you can avoid all of the rebuilding and the backtracking later on. So first, if you're new around here, my name is Kristen and I'm the co-founder of Coaching No Code Apps, where we help business owners and industry experts build custom apps to either start their app-based businesses or grow their existing businesses all without coding. So let's jump right into creating this roadmap. And I'm going to go over to my whiteboard here so that we can walk through this. So when you're building and launching your app, you really need to go through 4 main overarching phases. And this is how you're going to want to structure that roadmap for your development. So I have this target here. And I'm going to just walk you through these stages so that you can understand how they'll apply to your situation and your specific app. So first things first, before you do anything with your app, at the very core, you have to make sure that you have the right strategy in place. Now, again, a lot of people step into the no-code space and they just kind of jump in and get started with their apps. And they end up just building whatever they've figured out how to do so far. So maybe they have read a quick article or watched a video that teaches them how to build a specific feature, for example, and they just do those specific things in their app. And what they're left with is this kind of pieced together, kind of hacked together hodgepodge of an app that really they've just kind of been winging it through. They've just been winging it through the development, not following any sort of plan. They don't really have any strategy in place. They're just learning as they go and kind of throwing things together. All right. But again, what that leads to, and we've seen this happen with so many people, is that they get to the point where they really want to launch or they really need to launch and they just can't because either they don't have an app or they have an app and it just doesn't work very well, or it's just not scalable. It's not something that they can really bring users onto and then actually grow into a business. They just have to rebuild and backtrack. And we don't want you rebuilding and backtracking constantly. It just takes too much time, too much effort, and you can't constantly be doing that with your app and with your development. So you have to have the right strategy in place. And I want to compare this to building a house. And this is a comparison I make a lot because it's really easy to understand. Basically, if you're building a house, you don't just show up with your tools and the materials and start building, right? You start with a blueprint, okay? You start with a blueprint. And this is your strategy. It's what guides the construction of the house. It's what tells you, where to put certain pieces and what to build and when and in what order. You go off a blueprint. You don't just jump into it, because otherwise you're not going to get anywhere. It's like trying to build it with a blindfold on. It's not going to be effective or efficient. So that's your strategy. It's what tells you what to build, when to build it, in what order to build it, and also when to start injecting different phases of feedback for your app, different types of feedback, when to start growing your user base and expanding, and all of those little pieces. That's what your strategy is. You have to have that in place before you start to really successfully build and launch your app. And then once you do have that in place, the next really more technical component needs to come into play as well. And this is the structure of your app. Now, when I talk about structure, I really mean the components of your app that are going to need to be in place no matter which features or functionality you build into your app. So the structure, it's made up of things like your database, right? You need to know how to correctly structure your database based on your specific needs and your specific use case and your specific app. You need to know how to successfully create the overall architecture of your app. And this can go down to things like whether or not you should be building a single page app versus a multi-page app, for example. And this, again, needs to be based on your specific app, your specific users, your specific use cases. You need to cater the structure of your app to your own needs. And this is really important, because if you don't have the structure correct, then you're going to have a hard time building on top of it. You're going to have a hard time expanding your user base, potentially expanding your user types, expanding your feature sets and your functionality. Because if the structure is not sound, when you start to build on top of it, it's going to become more and more unstable. And that's when you start to experience a lot of technical problems. And sometimes those technical problems are really hard to identify. It's hard to find the root cause, and you just can't narrow it down. And the reason is because the entire structure just wasn't put in place correctly. Again, this is when we start seeing a lot of people have to rebuild because they just didn't put the right structure into place. So again, going back to our example of building a house, the structure is the foundation of a house. You have to put a solid foundation in place before you build the house, because if you don't, then later on, you're going to have tons of problems with the house itself because it wasn't built on top of that solid structure. You can think about, the frame of your house, just the basic framework, right? The architecture of the house, the overall architecture. These are the pieces that, no matter what you build on top of the house, maybe you add an addition, maybe you add an extra level, maybe you add a detached garage, no matter what you put inside the house, maybe you redo the interior of the house 10 times over time. No matter what you add on, this is still going to be there. The structure will still be in place. So that's what we're talking about when we're looking at this structural part of the roadmap, are those components that are going to be in place no matter what you add on. You're building on top of them or kind of within them, and so they have to be solid if you want a scalable app, if you want to be able to scale your app. Okay, so once you have the strategy and the structure in place, now you need to look even further outward. And this is where you start looking at the systems. The systems are really what make your app work and what make it work well. This is the logic that goes on behind the scenes. This is the thing, or these are the things that users don't see, but that they experience. It's all of that niche functionality, all of the customization that goes into your app. So the workflows, for example. And there's a really specific way that you need to put these quote unquote systems into place. They also need to be created in a reliable way, in an optimized way for performance, and in a scalable way. And I've said this before, but if you've already started building your app, or if you're getting to this point, a really good way to identify what problems you might see down the road is if you go into your app, if you go into the back end of your app, and it's hard for you to even find your way around or find anything to make changes or iterations or whatever it may be. If that's hard for you to even do, then that is a precursor for problems that are going to come up down the road. It's a really good sign that it's going to be hard to really grow and scale your apps. You really want to make sure that all of these systems, all of this logic is built in a really clean and concise and organized way. You need to make sure it performs well. You need to make sure it is scalable, assuming you are turning this into a business, assuming this is a business for you that you are planning to grow in terms of your user base, in terms of your feature sets, your functionality, and so on. So going back to our example with the house, the systems would be things like your plumbing or your electrical wiring. Think about the things inside your house where if you do one thing, then something else happens. If I flip this light switch, then the lights in the living room turn on. If I turn this faucet on, if I turn the knob on the faucet, then water comes out. If I push this button in my garage, then the garage door opens or closes, right? And so on. So think of the systems as those things where if you do one thing, then something else happens. We need to make sure all those things happen correctly and in a scalable way, right? They need to be optimized. Okay, so those are your systems. You have your strategy, your structure, and your systems. Now, the next thing you need to focus on, and this one is really big, is scale. Okay, you need to make sure that you are beginning to scale your app in the correct way. Most people who are building an app potentially for the first time, maybe they have never successfully launched an app before, they build and build and build, and they never stop to inject the right testing phases at the right time. And that means they never get the right feedback at the right time. All throughout your app's lifetime, you're going to be looking for different types of feedback at different points in that journey. Okay, so you need to make sure that you're getting the right feedback at the right time so that you can implement the right changes at the right time. So when you start to scale your app, this is not just about building more features. This is about bringing users on board, growing that user base, using the feedback to grow or evolve or update those feature sets, and then scaling it from there. So growing the user base, maybe adding on more user types, growing the feature sets, growing that functionality, and so on. So you have to be prepared to scale in a strategic way. Again, this is not about just building, building, and building, and building until really there is no end. And it's not even about just getting as many users on board as soon as you possibly can, even though that sounds counterintuitive. It's about scaling in a strategic way so that you can reliably and consistently grow the app. Now, again, going back to the example of our house, we have the blueprint, right? We have the structure and we have those systems inside. All of those things are working. Now think of all the changes that you can make to a house over time that has been built in that way with the correct strategy, structure, and systems. Maybe you redo the kitchen, maybe you redo the living room, maybe you add on that extra level or the extra garage or whatever it may be. Maybe you change the paint color inside 10 times while you're living there, right? You get a new TV, whatever it is, but think about how now that you have that structure in place, you can make constant changes throughout the lifetime of that house. That's how you really want to think about your app. You want to create this solid and reliable core so that you can then scale it. And you can scale it in lots of different ways depending on your needs at the time, depending on your users' needs at the time, right? But you want to make sure that you do it in this order so that you can actually get to the point of being able to scale. Because what is the purpose of, buying all of this really cool artwork or buying all of this furniture for your house when you don't have the house in the first place that's going to hold all of those things, right? You have to go in the right order. You have to start with the strategy or that blueprint. You have to move on to the structure, right? The overall architecture with your app, that database, okay? The structural components. You have to move into the systems, the things that make everything work behind the scenes, right? In the house, that electrical wiring, the plumbing. If you do this, then something else happens. And then you have to really scale in a strategic way. You have to make sure that you're getting the right feedback at the right times and that you're implementing and iterating and updating the app as you go, also in the most strategic way possible so that you can actually scale. So if you go through your development and your launch following this overarching roadmap, obviously there are tons of little nuanced pieces that you have to put into place at each step. And of course, we can't get into all of that in one video, but also understand that it's going to really depend on your specific app and your specific use cases as well, your specific target market, your users, and so on. But if you follow this overarching strategy and make sure that you go through these steps in the right order at the right times, you're going to be so much further ahead because of it. And you're going to be reducing the backtracking and the rebuilding you do dramatically. So follow this roadmap and make sure that you're putting all of the right pieces in place for your app. Because again, we don't want you backtracking and rebuilding and potentially just scrapping the project altogether, because you might have the absolute best app idea, this solution in the world, but if you can't strategically build and launch it, then it doesn't matter, right? So I hope that was helpful. And again, we do have a free 75-minute training. It's going to take you through how to get started with your app right now. So it's going to help you start putting that strategy in place. Or if you've already started building your app, it'll help you make sure that you're moving forward in the right direction so that you don't have more backtracking and more rebuilding down the road. So you can head to coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop, and you can sign up for that training there and go ahead and get started with your app today. So again, I hope that was helpful. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.